Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to go my review of WCW's Fall Brawl 1999. Starting off the evening, we're going to go to our first match of the night. It is Rey Mysterio, Billy Kidman, and Eddie Guerrero versus Vampiro, Shaggy 2 Dope, and Violent J. I thought it was a good match to start Fall Brawl 1999. Back and forth matchup between both teams with Mysterio, Kidman, and Guerrero keeping the pace of the match. Kidman ultimately hits his signature shooting star press, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are Rey Mysterio, Billy Kidman, and Eddie Guerrero. Hats off to Mysterio, Kidman, and Guerrero for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW Cruiserweight Championship. It is Lenny Lane versus Kaz Hayashi. I thought it was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Lane and Hayashi, with Hayashi keeping the pace of the match. But Lenny Lane ultimately hits the finish on Hayashi, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time still WCW Cruiserweight Champion, is Lenny Lane. Hats off to Lenny Lane for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Dean Malenko and Shane Douglas versus Hugh Morris and Brian Knobbs in a no disqualification tag team matchup. I thought it was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with Dean Malenko and Shane Douglas keeping the pace of the match. But Hugh Morris hits a moonsault off the top rope on Dean Malenko, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are Hugh Morris and Brian Knobbs. Hats off to Hugh Morris and Brian Knobbs for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW Television Championship. It is Rick Steiner versus Perry Saturn. I thought this was an okay matchup as well. Back and forth matchup between Rick and Perry Saturn, with Rick keeping the pace of the match. And Rick Steiner ultimately lands his signature bulldog on Perry Saturn, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Rick Steiner. Hats off to Rick Steiner for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus Berlin. I thought it was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Jim Duggan and Berlin, with Jim Duggan keeping the pace of the match. But Berlin hits a devastating neckbreaker on Hacksaw Jim Duggan, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Berlin. Hats off to Berlin for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Kendall Windham and Barry Windham versus Harlem Heat for the WCW Tag Team Championships. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with Booker T hitting a missile dropkick on Kendall Windham, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match, and at that time new WCW Tag Team Champions, are Harlem Heat. Hats off to Harlem Heat for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Sid Vicious versus Chris Benoit for the WCW United States Championship. I thought this was a good match. Back and forth matchup between Sid Vicious and Benoit, with Vicious keeping the pace of the match. Vicious then hits 2 devastating power bombs on Benoit, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time new WCW United States Champion, is Sid Vicious. Hats off to Sid Vicious for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Goldberg versus Diamond Dallas Page. I thought this was a good matchup as well. Back and forth matchup between Goldberg and DDP, with Goldberg keeping the pace of the match. Goldberg then hits a spear on Diamond Dallas Page, and then Goldberg ultimately hits his signature jackhammer on Diamond Dallas Page, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Goldberg. Hats off to Goldberg for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of WCW's Fall Brawl 1999. It is Hulk Hogan versus Sting for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Hogan and Sting. Diamond Dallas Page makes his way out to the ring. DDP then hits a diamond cutter. Sting then hits Hogan with the bat. And then Sting applies his signature Scorpion Deathlock on Hogan. And your winner of the match by submission, and at that time new WCW World Heavyweight Champion, is Sting. Hats off to Sting for getting the win in this matchup. Couple things I'm going to say about WCW's Fall Brawl 1999. It was a solid event, man, from top to bottom, to be honest with you. The opening matchup, Mysterio, Kidman, Guerrero teaming up against Vampiro, Shaggy, 2-Dope, and Violent J. Solid matchup from top to bottom. There's a couple matches on here I could have done without. Lenny Lane versus Kaz Hayashi. I think at this point the Cruiserweight division was not the same of what it originally was. I thought the match was awful, in my honest opinion. Dean Malenko teaming up with Shane Douglas versus Hugh Morris and Brian Knobbs. Solid matchup. I was kind of hoping Dean Malenko and Shane Douglas would have got the win, but unfortunately Hugh Morris and Brian Knobbs got the victory over Dean Malenko and Shane Douglas. Harlem Heat winning the WCW Tag Team Championships. And then Jim Duggan versus Berlin. It was an okay matchup. I was kind of hoping that Hacksaw Jim Duggan would get the win over Berlin, but unfortunately Berlin got the win over Hacksaw Jim Duggan. With that being said, though, just like I do with every single one of these pay-per-views, you guys know by now I always give these pay-per-views a rating from 1 out of a 10. 1 being the absolute worst, 10 being the absolute best. I'm going to have to give WCW's Fall Brawl 1999 a solid rating of a 4.5 at best. But this is my review of WCW's Fall Brawl 1999. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.